Hey friends, thank you again for joining us this afternoon. In this section, I will walk you through how students across the Houston region performed on the 2026 STAAR exam, as well as the year-over-year trend. So first, let's start with our younger learners. So what you see here is that the region trend. Let's start with the Houston region as a whole, looking at how grades 3 through 8 performed year over year. You can see right where the pandemic hit. Testing paused in 2020, and both subjects dropped hard the year after. And fast forward to 2026, reading has made its way all the way back and now sits at 52% meets and masters, a new all-time high record for the region. And that means more kids today are reading at grade level than ever before. And that's not just a recovery, that's a real growth past where we started. And what about math? Math had a bit longer climb. We're at 42% meets and masters this year, still 3 points below where we stood in 2019. But it's worth celebrating as well about how far have we come back. So next, let's zoom out a level and see how the Houston region compare with the state and with a group of districts that's very similar to ours. So compared with the rest of the state, Houston region trails just very slightly. 1 point behind math, 2 points behind reading. Now, there's a comparison that also matters a lot. The districts that are very similar to ours in size and student population. Here, we group them together and call them Texas urban districts. So I'm going to call them TUD for the rest of this presentation. So compared against TUD, Houston region is ahead by 3 points in both math and reading. So the story we see here is that we are a little bit behind state average, but we are outperforming the districts that face very similar challenge to ours. Next, let's look at how far Houston region grew this past year compared to the state and to TUD. So in math, Houston region grew 2 points this year, ahead of state's 1 point gain, but slightly behind TUD's 3 point gain. And reading here tells a slightly different story. Houston region and TUD both grew 2 points and both outpaced the state 1 point gain. So here's my takeaway for this slide. Houston is beating the state in both subjects. In math, we will still need to keep up with our peer districts, TUD. In reading, we're right there with them. Now let's bring this down to the district level and see how Houston area districts are leading the way. So zooming into individual districts, one thing stands out across the board. Every single Houston area district performed better in reading than in math in 2026. Spring Branch ISD leads the entire region in both subjects. 56% meets and masters in math, and 63% meets and master in reading. And that's well above our Houston region average, which 42% meets and master in math and 52% in reading. Galena Park ISD was also performing quite well this year, with 51% meets and master in math and 54% meets and master in reading. So if you work with families in any of these districts that saw big growth, there are exactly the kind of number worth bringing into your own conversation with them. So that's where districts stand today. Next, let's look at how much growth they have had past year. From 25 to 26, most Houston area districts move forward in both subjects. Spring Branch, and Yes Prep were leading the way. Keep Houston also saw strong growth with math, about 5 points, but not so much increase made in reading. And region-wide, we averaged at 2-point gain in both math and reading. So the takeaway here is that growth wasn't just limited to 1 or 2 districts. It was truly a regional trend, and with a handful of districts pulling ahead faster than the rest. So that's the story of our younger learners. Now let's move on to our EOC results. So just like we saw in the grades 3 through 8, Houston region has made real progress here. Algebra 1 has grown steadily and sharply, and we're now at 57% mid-semester in 2026, just 1 point below pre-pandemic levels. And English EOC broke its own record set just last year. And today we're at 55% mid-semester, 10 points above where we stood in 2019. And this is truly a new record for the region. So from last year alone, Algebra 1 gained 7 points, and English EOCs gained 5 points. There are exactly the kind of gains that translate into more students ready for college and career, as Algebra 1 and English EOC are the gatekeeper courses, and what we see here is true movement, real growth. And next, let's see how that stacks up against the state and against TUD. So in Algebra 1, Houston region was leading the way, ahead of both state and TUD. We're at 57% mid-semester, several points above the state and TUD. In English EOC, it's a more of a mixed picture. Houston region was at 55% mid-semesters, which beat TUD, but trailed state by 3 points. So let's be clear that Algebra 1 is clearly a region strength for us, and English EOC are an area for us to keep pushing on in the future. So how fast did Houston region grow compared to the rest of the Texas? Algebra 1 growth was strong everywhere this year. Houston region grew 8 points, state grew 7, TUD grew 9 points. In English EOCs, Houston's 5-point growth matched TUD exactly and beat state's 4-point gain. It means our teenagers are moving in the right direction and they are moving fast. And this is one of the strongest growth story you will see during this whole presentation. So let's bring this down to the district level again and see who is leading on EOC. So across the region, most districts saw students do better in Algebra 1 than on English EOC in 2026. Harmony Public School led the entire region in both subjects. 74% meets and master in Algebra 1, and 71% meets and master in English EOCs. And that's well above the Houston region average of 57% meets and master in Algebra 1 and the 55% passing rate in English EOC. On the other hand, Spring here has a little bit more room to grow, around 40% in Algebra 1 and 43% in English EOC. However, as we're about to see, Spring ISD actually made very sizable growth this past year. So let's look at how district level growth on EOC in the next slide. So guys, this is where the story gets super exciting. Every single Houston area district had growth in both Algebra 1 and English EOC this year. Klein ISD posted 13-point jump in Algebra 1, which is the largest gain in the region. Spring ISD and Yes Prep each grew 12 points in Algebra 1, and both also posted the strongest English EOC gains at 7 points each. Branch ISD wasn't falling far behind by growing 11 points in Algebra 1 just one past year. So region-wide, we averaged an 8-point gain in Algebra 1 and 5-point gain in English EOCs. So progress like this never happened by accident. And this is a true celebrating moment with the districts, teachers, and families. So that's the story of the grades 3 through 8 and for our end of course exam. Now let's move on to the final part of the story, the STAAR perform across student group. Let's start by looking at the race ethnicity groups. So in math, across all grades level, Black and Hispanic students grew faster than their Asian and white peers this year. So from 2025 to 26, Black students gained 3 points. Hispanic students saw 4 points gain. And that's a real and meaningful progress. But there's the other part of the story. The gap between across all the groups haven't closed much over time. So in 2026, Asian students are at 76% mid-semester, white students at 66%, Hispanic students at 42%, and Black students at 33% mid-semester. So the growth we saw here is real and it's encouraging, but the gap left to close is still pretty significant. And next, let's go over some reading performance. So the reading performance across all grades tells a more hopeful version of the story. So in 2026, Black and Hispanic students have now surpassed their own pre-pandemic reading level by 12 points and 11 points respectively. That is truly a huge growth for both groups. And it's truly narrowing the gap with their Asian and white peers. And this is the kind of recovery worth celebrating loudly. And even as we're still monitoring the growth, the gaps that remains. And next, let's look at how performance by economic status. So economically disadvantaged students have made real progress too. So in reading, they surpassed their pre-pandemic levels and now sits at 46% mid-semester in 2026. In math, however, they have not quite recovered yet, sits at 38% mid-semester in 2026. And meanwhile, their non-economically disadvantaged peers have recovered in both subjects, 64% mid-semester in math and 74% passing rate in reading. So the gap by economic status is still wide, especially in math. And last but not least, we have another student group to look at, our emerging bilingual students. So the stories about emerging bilingual students here is also very encouraging. In 2026, emerging bilingual students have recovered to their own pre-pandemic level in both reading and math. So on average, they gained 2 points in math and 14 points in reading. Their non-emergent bilingual peers, by comparison, have only fully recovered in reading, not math. Wow, guys, we just covered so much information. So let's recap by going over the key takeaways again. So the key takeaway here is reading scores in the Houston region broke their own record, reaching another all-time high. And math is also steadily improving, and it's now closing to pre-pandemic level. And students grew across most grades in both math and reading, with Algebra 1 leading the growth at 8-point gain in just 1 year. That's truly amazing. And last but not least, Black and Hispanic students outperformed their pre-pandemic level in reading with 12 points and 11 points respectively. However, please keep in mind the differences between the more and less advantaged groups remained far too large.